And please join me in giving a warm Chicago welcome to the incomparable Ada Limón.
You all look so beautiful out there. What a gift to be in Chicago and to be in this beautiful library. I am a big fan of libraries and independent bookstores, and I always think that as much as I had wonderful teachers and mentors, the reason I'm a poet is because of the library and the independent bookstore. Because I was able to peruse things and also put them down. You know, I could be like, oh, this person, John Ashbery, I don't like him. But then it wasn't until I was in my 40s where I was like, oh, John Ashbery's amazing. But, you know, as a young person, I was able to pick things up and put things down, which I feel like we often need that permission. And we don't think about that in terms of what libraries offer us, is to get something and be like, oh, this is what I need right now, or this is not what I need right now. And I feel like very often when we teach poetry, we're like, no, this is what you should be reading. And like, the quickest way for me to not read something is for someone to tell me this is what I should be reading. You know, the quickest way for me to not do something is to say, this is what you should be doing. So I just want to take a moment to appreciate this incredible library and all the work that they have done. So thank you. I'm going to begin with a short reading. I'm just going to read 5 poems, and then a dear friend of mine is going to join me on stage, and we'll have a conversation right over there. I didn't want you to think that was just, you know, for show. We will move over there, and by that point, we'll be, you know, younger and stronger, and all of these transitions will have happened. Our hearts will have been healed. I have high expectations. I'm going to begin with a poem that, for me, there's a lot of times where people are asking me to say specific things. This was pre-laureateship, but I think that specifically as a brown woman writer, sometimes people will say, well, why aren't you writing about X, Y, and Z? We need to hear your viewpoint on this and that. And I felt even as a graduate student, that was what kept coming up and kept coming up. And this is a poem that is in direct response to one of those requests, which is instead of doing the thing that someone asked me to do, there's a theme here. I wrote this poem. Give me this. I thought it was the neighbor's cat, back to clean the clock of the fledgling robins low in their nest, stuck in the dense hedge by the house. But what came was much stranger, a liquidity moving, all muscle and bristle, a groundhog, slippery and waddle thieving my tomatoes, still green in the morning shade. I watched her munch and stand on her haunches, taking such pleasure in the watery bites. Why am I not allowed delight? A stranger writes to request my thoughts on suffering. Barbed wire pulled out of the mouth as if demanding that I kneel to the trap of coiled spikes used in warfare and fencing. Instead, I watch the groundhog more closely, and a sound escapes me, a small spasm of joy I did not imagine when I woke. She is a funny creature and earnest, and she is doing what she can to survive. I have students who will say, oh, you're the groundhog. Which I just love. I'm like, yes, I am the groundhog. I will take it. Would that would be the case. This is a short poem. Sanctuary. Suppose it's easy to slip into another's green skin, bury yourself in leaves and wait for a breaking open, a breaking out. I have before been tricked into believing I could be both an I and the world. The great I of the world is both gaze and gloss, to be swallowed by being seen. A dream, to be made whole by being not a witness, but witnessed. And, oh, thank you. I'm going to read this poem because I like to bring her into the room. This is for my stepmother that passed away in 2010, and it's also for one of my favorite plants of the spring. Come in, join us. I know I've seen you have this plant here. It's one of the first yellows of spring. Forsythia. At the cabin in Snug Hollow, near McSwain Branch Creek, just spring, all the animals are out, and my beloved and I are lying in a soft silence. We are talking about how we carry so many people with us wherever we go, how even when simply living, these unearned moments are a tribute to the dead. We are both expecting to hear an owl as the night deepens. All afternoon from the porch, we watched an eastern towhee furiously build her nest in the untamed forsythia, with its yellow spilling out into the horizon. I told him that the way I remember the name forsythia is that when my stepmother, Cynthia, was dying that last week, she said lucidly but mysteriously, "More yellow." And I thought, yes, more yellow, and nodded because I agreed, of course, more yellow. And so now in my head, when I see that yellow tangle, I say, for Cynthia, for Cynthia, for Scythia, for Scythia, more yellow. It is night now, and the owl never comes, only more of night and what repeats in the night. It's funny to say things like, that's a true story, after a poem, because what does that mean? What is truth? This is what the lovely thing about being a poet is that you get to speak with really wise people, and there's this moment where you get to stand up there and be like, oh, we don't know anything. That's why we write poems. We know nothing, no wisdom. Isn't that wonderful? I have no answers at all. Like that is my platform. Like what? Okay. That's what I get to do. This is a poem I wrote for the wonderful poet Arasalis Gourmet, who's one of just a dear human being and poet. And she had a dream and sent me an email about the dream she had. And then I asked if I could write this poem and sent it to her. How we see each other. I forget I am a woman walking alone and wave at a maroon car, assuming it's a neighbor or a friend. The car then circles the block and goes past me 5 times. One wave, and 5 times the car circles. Strangers. It is the early evening, the fireflies not yet out. I trick the hunting car by pretending to walk into a different house. I am upset by this, but it is life. So I make dinner and listen to a terrible audiobook on Latin American literature that's so dull, it's Dove soap. Violence is done to us, and history records it. Gold ruins us, men ruins us. That's how the world was made, don't you know? A group of us, to tune out our grief every week, are watching dance movies. 5 women watching people leap and grind. Every time I watch the films, I cry. Each week, even though we are hidden from each other by distance, I know I am the first to break into tears. Something about the body moving freely, someone lifting it, or just the body alone in movement, safe in its black expanse of stage. The body as rebellion, as defiance, as immune. Aracelis writes to tell me she's had a dream where I am in Oaxaca, wearing a black dress covered with animals. In her dream, I am brushing and brushing my hair with a brush made out of animal hair. There is a large mirror and a room full of books. History comes at us through the sheen of time. I write back, soundtrack. Where is that coming from? I kind of love it. Oh, am I doing it? I don't think so. There's no buttons here. I just said buttons very strangely. There are no buttons. Kittens, buttons. Okay, so I'm just going to read that second half again. Aracelis writes to tell me she's had a dream where I am in Oaxaca wearing a black dress covered with animals. In her dream, I am brushing and brushing my hair with a brush made out of animal hair. There is a large mirror and a room full of books. History comes at us through the sheen of time. I write back, was it ominous or was it hopeful? She says, the word I am thinking of is strong. I kindle the image in my body all day, the mirror, the brush, the animals, the vast expanse of imagination, the solid gaze of a woman who has witnessed me as unassailable, the clarity of her vision so clean I feel almost free. Thank you. And I'll read one more in this portion, and then we'll go have a conversation. And then I'll read a few more at the end. But I wanted to read this poem. I think of it as the poem that got me back into writing during the hardest parts of the isolation of the pandemic, where I kept thinking, why on earth would anyone write anything? And I feel like we may feel that way right now. The end of poetry. Enough of osseous and chickadee and sunflower and snowshoes, maple and seeds, samara and shoot. Enough chiaroscuro, enough of thus and prophecy and the stoic farmer and faith in our Father and 'tis of thee. Enough of bosom and bud, skin and God not forgetting, and star bodies and frozen birds. Enough of the will to go on and not go on, or how a certain light does a certain thing. Enough of the kneeling and the rising and the looking inward and the looking up. Enough of the gun, the drama, and the acquaintance's suicide, the long-lost letter on the dresser. Enough of the longing and the ego, and the obliteration of ego. Enough of the mother and the child, and the father and the child. And enough of the pointing to the world, weary and desperate. Enough of the brutal and the border. Enough of can you see me? Can you hear me? Enough I am human, enough I am alone, and I am desperate, enough of the animal saving me, enough of the high water, enough sorrow, enough of the air and its ease. I am asking you to touch me. Yes! Thank you.
If you can. Hi, I'm Mariela Colon. I'm with the Chicago Public Library, and I'm pleased to introduce the second part of our program. Welcoming to the stage, writer Mark Turcot. Writer Mark Turcot of the Turtle Mountain Band Anishinaabe have been an active member of Chicago's thriving poetry scene since first arriving in the early 90s. He is an author of 4 collections, including The Feathered Heart and Exploding Chippewas. His poetry and prose has appeared in Tri-Quarterly, Poetry, Kenyon Review, Plowshares, The Missouri Review, and many other American and international journals, and is included in the first ever Norton Anthology of Native Nations Poetry. He has been the recipient of awards from the Limón Foundation and the Wisconsin Arts Board. He lives in Chicago, where he is a distinguished writer in residence in the English department at DePaul University. I'm so pleased to welcome him on stage to start the conversation with Limón.
Ooh, testing. Can you hear me okay? Itsy bitsy spider went up the water spout. Okay, I'm just testing, mic testing. I
was waiting to hear what happened to the spider.
It's a secret. It's an Ojibwe spider, so I can't tell you. Because look what, well, not you personally, but look what happens when we share stuff. Lose it. So. By the way, I need to do this little Ojibwe thing, by the way. It's mentioned our inaugural, I need to do this Ojibwe thing. Mention our inaugural Chicago Poet Laureate one more time, Avery R. Young. Thanks for being here, Avery. When I first saw a list of nominated names, I was like, if Avery's not our first Chicago Poet Laureate, then there's something wrong with Chicago. What a precedent. I mean, what a tones that are being set by Avery. And by the way, be good, because you're sitting next to my sweetheart, my wife. Yeah, so behave, Avery. Impossible. When I hear you read, Ada, I feel brilliant. It's confirmed for me how brilliant I am, because your poems are so smart, and I think I understand them. You know, so that's nice at my age, where I'm at in life right now, to get that little affirmation. But you're so smart that you answered the question with your last poem that I was going to start the whole chat with. So I'm going to tweak a little bit and say, the first time you and I met was in March of 2012, and you were on one of those poets crushed in a car tours, going to venues all over the place, probably upper Midwest kind of things, with Michael 1B Robbins and Adam Clay, 2 terrific poets, smashed together in these cars. You were reading at some bar here in the city. You were nice enough to come to one of my classes and talk to some of my students. That seems like and now you just got back from Italy. So it seems like a long way. Is that as far away for you as it is for me?
You know, it's far away, but it also feels just like yesterday.
Okay.
You know, I feel like it's, once you dedicate your life to poetry, there's a level in which you got in the car and you just never got out.
Okay. Right.
So I think on some levels it's the same. It's just now a plane. But for the most part, I'm still that same person. Reading and writing. In fact, one of the things that we used to do, Adam and Michael and I, we're still doing it, which is to try to write a poem a day for the month of April. And I have 2 that I have to write today. So if anyone has any ideas, come see me afterwards. But so far, I've been keeping up, and that was part of those tours, was to write every single day. And it has been really a remarkable thing to revivify myself with poems again this month. Yeah.
I mean, that's poetry in the trenches stuff. And I think it's vital. One of the things I try to do in my poetry classes is remind my students that poetry isn't just this. this thing, sitting in a room and talking about poems and writing poems, like the most important thing in the world. Eventually, you and your poems end up in the world
Yeah.
somewhere, and people react to them. And that changes a lot of what you're doing.
Yeah.
So sooner or later, you got to get in the trenches, get your boots muddy. But thanks. I mean, that was a glorious gesture on you guys' part. Who knew?
Yeah. Yeah.
Can I bring it up since you're being kind of humble about it, is this anthology that just came out?
Oh, yeah.
So it's part of your, one of the things you're doing for the Poet Laureate service that you're doing. It's You Are Here, Poetry in the Natural World. And you solicited so many poems from people that I admire. Joy Harjo, who, by the way, you followed as Poet Laureate of the U.S. I think that's cosmic and obviously on purpose, you know how the cosmos is. What a legacy to be handing down and then to you.
Oh, yeah.
I can't wait to see who comes next.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, right. Yeah, are you getting tired? Are you getting a little bit tired? Yeah.
I'm like,
I
yeah,
hear
me
that
too.
happens.
No.
But I
I'm
mean,
doing great.
people like Joy Harjo, Patricia Smith, Cedar Seago, Jake Skeets, and the adorable Diane Seuss. I'm leaning a little brown in my picks but Diane, there's no color.
Yeah.
I mean, she's every color, Diane Seuss. But just so amazing to open a book and see those names. It just makes you want to be where you're at, right?
Yeah.
But in the introduction, we talked a little bit about this previously. You share the story of looking at a walking trail map, and you were trying to decide which route you wanted to take, through the thing. And then you noticed what you call the friendly little red arrow that, of course, was saying, "You are here." And you say in that moment, I'm going to paraphrase, you say you took it as a reminder of your place and your part in this nature thing that you were about to encounter. And that is a striking revelation. I mean, your revelation in that moment encapsulated what I often seek in a poem or a painting or even a person, which is to be reminded of my place, my part, perhaps even my purpose. So it seems like we're talking about the same thing.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And your moment, of course, helped me see the meaning of the book's title, which wasn't obvious to me before. I thought it was brilliant. Poetry in the natural world. And I think that's really important compared to, here's some poems about nature.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with poems about nature, but I think, this twist that you assigned, because you solicited these poems, right? Made it explicitly different for me
Yeah.
than, just the average, here's a tree and I'm going to describe it.
Right.
Thoughts?
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing it up. Every laureate is asked to do a signature project, and I really wanted to do something that connected poetry and nature, and I was trying to think of different ways that could happen. And we're working with the national parks, which has been amazing, and putting really iconic poems in different national parks around the country, working with the Poetry Society of America. But that is just this beautiful thing, but it's also very intentional nature, right? It's this idea of I'm going to go to this place. And I feel like I wanted to answer that with the anthology, which is the dailiness of nature, which is us in nature, which is us being nature, and not having this separateness that feels like, I'm going to go to it, but I am it. And that it is the breath that I'm breathing. It is it is all of us in a room. It is the energy between us. And I asked these poets if they would, write an original poem to the landscape around them, in the landscape around them, to think about something they connected to. And as these poems came in, I just would weep. I mean, they're so beautiful. And I put them all out on my kitchen table as you print them out and you put them I know you've ordered many books, so and I was like, I put them out and I thought, they are all speaking to each other. And I was like, this is a forest. This is what we made. And one of the reasons I wanted to make this book too was that, with the nature poem, as we think about the nature poem, it's time for a new nature poem, right? Because we have a new nature. It's a little more urgent. We have anxiety about it. We're losing species every day. And so I think that there's a level in which, in order to write this book and make this book, we had to make room for that. Our sort of anxiety about it, our confusion about it, our love for it, our guilt, all of these things that are connected. And each of the poems do different things within it. And it's really one of the honors of my life to have stewarded the book into the world. I think it will have a long life. And all I did was ask people, and what they brought me was truly remarkable. It's a beautiful book.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That says a lot about who's doing the asking. I think for sure. The other thing I wanted to dance around a little bit is, I made a joke about you answering the question that I wanted to start with. But that's okay. We're going to do it anyway because that's all it says on my notes. So I'm not too light on my feet, obviously. By the way, I feel like I'm in 7th grade, and I did something in Mr. Fullerton's class, and I got sent to the principal with this chair. I'm sitting outside the principal's office in one of those things like from 1972.
Yeah.
Chair, yeah.
Yeah.
Fat guys in chairs with arms. Just something to think about. Even my cardiologist in his waiting room has chairs with arms. It's like everybody you work with is fat. Anyway, sorry. I'm when's that beer going to get here? That's what I want. Sorry. Yeah. I'm sorry?
Oh, do you want a different chair?
Oh, no. Gosh, no. I was just joking. Yeah, what else can I complain about that I might? Okay, let's get serious. The End of Poetry, that poem. It's at the end of your most recent book. It's interesting to know that you wrote it as a way of getting yourself back into the rhythm. And it's in the end of The Hurting Kind. And at one layer, it's a poem that ponders this idea that lots of us have pondered of just stop writing about the things that we write about.
Yeah.
Louise Erdrich has a great poem about that. Meg Carney has a good one. But they're very much aimed at the self. And when I've written poems like that or just used them as like prompts for myself to get going, it's always pretty much aimed at myself, like arguing with myself. And yours is very personal, and naturally, it's personal for you. But it's also rather vivid and frankly convincing in a more universal manner that I found hard to ignore. I wasn't trying, but I was like, wow, how do I go sit down and scribble without this plea that you're making in this poem? And my original question was going to be, how have you answered your own plea? Because obviously you've been writing poems. And I wanted to mention that what really changed it for me after I thought about it some more was that last line, I'm asking you to touch me. Because as I say, I often look to art or people to find my place in the world or make some connection or whatever. I also look to be touched. I want to be intruded upon in good ways, obviously, and bad ways too, depending on where the beer's at. But that's why I'm so smart, is because I think I'm sharing some thoughts with you and discovering them in your work. And it's fun, like you said, it's fun to encounter smart people in the world, right? They make me feel smarter. And I just want to know, if you could riff on that a little bit, just that idea of, where you land. Did you know you were going to land there? That was going to be the ultimate ask?
Yeah,
of that
no,
poem?
no, and I'm glad you brought up this poem because, and I did read it because you had mentioned that you might bring it up. So I was like, oh, okay, well, we'll have context, we'll have the poem. But it was a moment where I just kept thinking, oh, these are all the things that I won't write about, right? Osseous, that's one of my favorite words. Chickadee, Samaran, shoot, chiaroscuro, right? Enough. And then I kept thinking, well, what are the other? Enough of the mother and the child, the father and the child, right? And then enough of the ego, and the obliteration of ego. I was thinking about all the poems I had written, and how I could enter them, and they all felt, innocuous. And I was like, how can I make something out of them? And then, of course, I was making this list of these things, discarded things that I wasn't going to do anything with. And then I thought, oh no, this is the poem. This is the poem. Enough of this. And then when it started to build, I realized, oh, this is an ask. And the ask is serious. And the ask is, get into the physical world. And in some ways, out of the concepts out of abstraction and reach back, and be touched, be moved, and also, hold someone. And that was really, that was where the poem completely shifted for me. I didn't expect it to happen. And someone had said, it sounds like the end of poetry forever. It sounds like you're never going to write again. And I said, no, doesn't it just sound like you're putting down the pen for the day? And that's what I think of. I think of that's the ask. And the ask is I'm going to now move into the world. And almost like the world is now asking you to touch it.
Perfect. That's exactly what I thought you were going to say. So I am brilliant. Oh, wow, it's kind of hard to follow that now. Wow. That wasn't very smart of me. It confirms for me something else. And I don't know if you're familiar with John Anderson's poem, God, from the 60s maybe. I just forgot the name of it. Oh, The Secret of Poetry. Do you know that poem?
Yeah.
Which ends with this phrase, to leave, all I really want to do is to leave on your sill one cold flower whose beauty would leave you inconsolable all day. And I've tried to share this poem and this idea with students, and I don't think they're old enough, or beat up enough, or damaged enough, or dragged through the street enough, or got their boots, because they kind of don't know what I'm talking about. But I want to ask you, is it possible? I love that poem. I love that poem. I love what it does to me. Like, yes, leave me inconsolable all day. I'll make it. Maybe that's the thing. You need to know that you can survive it. You need to have done it. This old idea of like, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Bullshit. Bullshit. What doesn't kill you often damages you and hurts you and destroys parts of you, and you have to fight back from it.
Yeah.
So forget the bumper sticker version of that idea.
Yeah.
And it took me a while to learn that was just a silly bumper sticker idea. And for me, this, the question is it possible? Can we, because maybe it's part of what we're supposed to do as artists in the world, can we be torn to pieces in a way that is uplifting ultimately? Is that possible?
I love this question and conversation because I think about it a lot. Because a lot of people, as you know, Joy was asked this quite a bit in this role. This role will make you think about poetry in a whole new way because people will ask you, what? Oh, hi, Marty. What can poetry do, right? What is poetry's power? And it's very interesting because you spend a lot of time being a poet just making poems. You don't sit there and expound on poetry. You just make poems. And so it was hard for me, at first to try to figure out what that was. And I thought, at its core, a poem, is supposed to make you feel. And the biggest thing that we do nowadays, and I think that most of us have had to do it as a survival technique, is to just go numb. And we numb because that's easiest so we can get from Monday to Friday, and be alive. And so I understand the need for numbing, and I understand the need for shutting down, all of that. And I also understand why sometimes one poem is not the right poem, because it may not be, we don't need a beautiful image. Maybe we need, a rageful poem, or maybe we need, depending on where we are in our life and what's happening to us and to the world. But I think that turning on the feeling, whether that's love or beauty or grief or rage or anger, that is part of its job. And I think that when we feel and allow ourselves to feel, we allow ourselves to actually start the process of transformation. It doesn't mean that we come out healed, but it means that we break open enough to let other possibilities in. And I feel like if we numb and we just continue being numb, there's no possibility of coming out the other end because we're just trying to get from one point to the other. And I have been there. But I think there are times where someone will hand you a poem and you think, oh, I don't know if I can read this right now. There are poems that I'll open in front of you and think, I'm gonna have to skip that for myself, for my heart, for this person right here, because I can't handle it. But that is, I think, the poem's job, and I think that it does. I don't know if the right phrase is uplifting, but I do think it's transformative. And I think that poetry can do that, and I think it does do that. And I think that's why people get scared of it. Not just teaching it and not just talking about it, but I think it's why politicians are scared of it. I think they're like, oh, poets are here, you know? I think there is a level where it's like, uh-oh, poets are watching.
Get out the uncomfortable
You know?
chairs.
And I think, I think there is that moment where we needle at what's inside, and we start to unearth it. And it is our job to expose what the human condition is in all its full spectrum of emotion.
Again, brilliant. Nicely said. And the Anderson poem does say inconsolable all day.
Yeah,
Doesn't say forever.
right.
Doesn't even say tomorrow. It says all day.
Yeah,
And I think sometimes we need to make ourselves uncomfortable. Read that poem maybe sometimes. Sometimes you can read it. You find out after you get through it, and then you feel like you've done something.
yeah.
You've challenged yourself, in
Yeah.
ways. That's all just so important. All this stuff is so important.
Yeah.
Who knew you and I were both inspired by Patti Smith in 1972 or whatever? You were around then?
No.
I don't know. Okay, sorry. Thanks. So we got a couple minutes yet before you read some more poems. So how about if we get a little bit lighter? What the heck's your problem with putting poetry next to prose on your bookshelf?
Oh, yeah, you
I
read
had
that
three
part.
people say, if you don't ask her that, they're going to be. And I
yeah.
looked at it and I was like, what's the controversy? But what's going on?
Yeah. Well, they are different.
Okay. Well, I
You
put
know-
blue books next to green ones on my,
That's okay.
Okay, that's all right.
So he's referring to, in the New York Times, they had asked me how I organized my bookshelf and all of these things, and I said that all of my poetry is separate from my prose. But that to me is because I'm actually going to it for a different reason. When I go to poetry, I am going for a different reason than when I go to prose. Prose often is the place for answers. Poetry is the place for more questions. And so I'm going over here because I need to know which questions to keep asking, and what part of me needs to be turned on to wonder. And when I go to prose, I'm thinking, what are the things that I need to know? What are the things that I need to figure out, what I need to learn, what I need to, So it's a different kind of action. And so for me, all my poetry books they're all together, and all the prose, and they're in the same room. They're just on the other side of the room.
Okay. Okay, Randy, does that make you happy? So I noticed this about your amazing books. The first one, your first book of poems, was called Lucky Wreck. And that sounds like happy accident. And I often feel like my mother used to say that I was an accident. And I used to say, and my life has been a wreck ever since. It's the first line of my young adult novel that I haven't written yet. I'm working on it. And then we go to the next book, This Big Fake World. Lucky Wreck, This Big Fake World. Sharks in the rivers, bright dead things, the carrying, the hurting kind. And without knowing you and knowing these books, if I went by those titles, I'd be like, wow, what happened? What is happening? I don't know if that's too big to even sort of think about it all right now. I've seen where somebody said, are you basically a lucky wreck? Or is your, and you kind of said, yeah.
Yeah.
Sort of defines me.
Yeah.
But the first line of that book, first line of the first poem in that book is, we solved the problem of the wind with an orange.
Yeah.
That's like, I don't want to sit down and write again after that. I mean, just like the other. You wrote a whole poem that made me feel that way. You wrote one line that made me feel that way. So what do you think of that brilliant idea on my part?
No, I love that. And I love that you brought up Lucky Wreck because I did have, poets have to make a living. I don't know if you know that. But we often have to have jobs. And I worked for Martha Stewart for a small time. And the marketing manager brought me in and said that they had seen my book and said, "Do you think of yourself as a lucky wreck?" And I thought this was so interesting because I'm in my workspace, which was very different from my poetry space.
This was the magazine.
The magazine.
The magazine you were writing for.
Yeah, and so and I had to sort of then defend this title, and I remember thinking about how much I believed in the wreck of us all. Like really, everyone I knew and know is going through really hard things, like unbelievably hard things. And yet there is some sort of moment where they continue or go on or write a poem or a song or show up to class. And I think, how are you doing that? And I think that almost all the books have a sort of like one similar thing, which is the amazement of being alive. And that I find that that still is what I lean on when I find myself torn to pieces. It feels like I can still be amazed, and I can still believe in the human capacity to love. And I think all those books do that. And with The Caring and the Hurting Kind, you notice that I also really like the K sound. Lucky wreck, this big fake world, sharks in the rivers. Bright Dead Things is the only one that doesn't have a K sound. But I also love a spondee. It's a poetry joke. Spondees.
Boom.
But I think that for me, that moving into that idea of what we carry and the idea of the hurting kind, all of these things, like even the hurting kind, it has a heavy title, but it's about being tender. It's about those of us who are sensitive enough to the world that we allow ourselves to be hurt by it, and that we don't numb out to it, or that we don't sort of joyfully go, "Oh, I'm fine." Or we do, right? But then to our dear ones, we say, "Okay, do you want to get real? Let's talk." And so the hurting kind is really about the idea of, yes, being amazed, but also being amazed at our capacity to be hurt and then to grow from that hurt, and the hope that is inherent in the witnessing of that process.
That's good, smart stuff. Everybody, I'd kind of like to hear Ada read a couple last poems. How about you guys? Ada Limón. Thanks so much, Ada.
Thank you, guys. Oh, it's been such a joy. I thought I would read this poem that is about, when Mark and I were talking about the ending of a poem and whether or not I saw it coming, this is another end that I did not see coming. I thought it would begin with birds, and then it takes a right turn. Calling things what they are. I pass the feeder and yell, "Grackle party." And then an hour later I yell, "Morning dove after party." I call the feeder the party and the seed on the ground the after party. I am getting so good at watching that I've even dug out the binoculars an old poet gave me back when I was young and heading to the Cape with so much future ahead of me it was like my own ocean. "Tufted titmouse," I yell. And Lucas laughs and says, "Thought so." But he's humoring me. He didn't think so at all. My father does the same thing, shouts out at the feeder, announcing the party attendees. He throws a whole peanut or two at the Stellar's jay, who visits on the low oak branch in the morning. To think there was a time I thought birds were kind of boring. Brown bird, gray bird, black bird, blah, blah, blah bird. Then I started to learn their names by the ocean. And the person I was dating said, "That's the problem with you, Limón. You're all fauna and no flora." And I began to learn the names of trees. I like to call things as they are. Before, the only thing I was interested in was love, how it grips you, how it terrifies you, how it annihilates and resuscitates you. I didn't know then that it wasn't even love that I was interested in, but my own suffering. I thought suffering kept things interesting. How funny that I called it love, and the whole time it was pain. That was one of those that snuck up on me. And I'll just read 3 more. How's that? This is a poem. I think about music a lot. I was in a band once, and I was trying to think of if I could really play an instrument, what it would be. And this is the poem that came from it. Instrumentation. If I could play an instrument for real, I like the idea of playing the jawbone. The rattle of something dead in your hand, the thing that beats back to the sky and says, I'm still here, even though clearly the donkey isn't here, or the horse isn't here. Just the teeth and the jaw making music like resurrection or haunting or just plain need. What I like most is that the jawbone is an idiophone, which I misread once as ideaphone. But an idiophone is just that it makes music by the whole thing vibrating without strings. I want that. That kind of reeling in the wind, all the loose dry teeth, all the old bones of the skull, all of the world and the figure swaying with its stick to make untuned music even death cannot deny. And I'll read 2 more poems, and I wanted to read a poem from my grandfather. Heart on Fire. As a foster child, my grandfather learned not to get in trouble. Mexican and motherless, dead as he was from tuberculosis, he practiced words in a new language and kept his slender head down. When the older boys begged him to slip into the music shop's upper window to steal harmonicas for each of them, music being important, thievery being secondary, he refused. When the cops came to spot the boys who robbed the music store, they could easily find the one spitting broken notes into the air, joyously mouthing the stainless steel, mimicking men on street corners busking for coins. But not my grandfather. He knew not to risk it all for a stolen moment of exaltation. It's easy to imagine this is who I come from, a line of serious men who follow the rules. But might I add that later he was a dancer, a singer, an actor whose best roles ended up on the cutting room floor, a cut-up, a ham who liked a good story, who would have told you life was a series of warnings, but also magic. Once he was sent for a box of matches, and he put that box of Strike Anywheres in the pocket of his madras shirt, and he ran home. He ran so fast to be on time, to be good. And when he did so, the whole box ignited. So he was a boy running down the canyon hill with what looked like a heart on fire. He'd laugh when he told you this. A heart on fire, he'd say, so you'd remember. And I will finish with this poem, and thank you again for being here. It's just been such a joy, and thank you so much for for making this happen with me, Mark. This is a poem. The speaker does something illicit in this poem. The speaker does the illicit thing. Just making clear. The speaker did that. Hooky. We skipped that last class, rolled joints in my clean apartment, close to a bar called Flowers, which we loved and went to so often. Joel's dad found his maxed out credit card once and said, "Who are you buying all these flowers for?" That day, we weren't bound to the bar, where Fadi kept a back table for friends and on busy nights let us hover. It was a rare Brigadoon day when the sun bared herself in Seattle's U District, and the trees were in heat, and everything felt wild and illicit, and we decided to get as high as we could and lie down under the cherry trees. I was straight A's and Dean's List, but could roll 3 perfect joints and even add a filter, thanks to 3 guys I met in a Spanish hostel. And when we made it to the kaleidoscopic row of ancient cherry trees, we started laughing, hard and scary-like, contagious, and the breeze was blowing pink cherry blossoms through the air, and everyone we saw was stoned and making out with someone, and it seemed so absurd that we could ever learn anything from inside the darkness. And soon, it wasn't so much funny anymore, but serious. The true and serious beauty of trees. How it seemed insane that they should offer this to us. How unworthy we were, bewildered. How soon we were nearly weeping at their trunks as they tossed down petal after petal. And we tried to remember how it felt to receive and notice the receiving. Pink, 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 pink. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. If you can remain seated, we will begin the author signing shortly. Thank you again.